In late 2020, during the lockdown, I put out a call to a bunch of folks in a D&D Facebook group I'm a part of. These were all folks in the same industry as me, and some of whom were friends who I'd played D&D with before. But some of them were not, because I wanted to play with a lot of people. Because I wanted to try a different approach to a game. A West Marches campaign. There's a great Matt Colville video about how to run a West Marches game, and I think there's a lot of good advice in there. This video won't be as much of a how-to guide. This will be more about how I ran mine. But first, we do need to cover the basics of what a West Marches campaign is. A West Marches game is a term from a series of blog posts written by the game designer Ben Robbins. The name comes from a region of his world where he ran a campaign. The format is this: you have a lot of players, and based on the information you give them, they set their own objectives. And then they recruit other players to accompany them on those missions. And once they put together their group, they reach out to you, and they schedule a game. This takes the place of having a regular game night with the same people every time. So it allows for a lot more players moving in and out of your campaign, and it accommodates for the varying schedules of adults who play D&D. In his video, Matt suggested setting up a Facebook group or a subreddit. In hindsight, I think a Facebook group might have worked a little bit better, but I just hate Facebook so much. I hate logging into it. I hate being on it. So I made a subreddit. Some of you, understandably, will have that reaction toward Reddit. That's totally valid. I've had better experiences with Reddit overall. This subreddit and the campaign was called Signals from Seclusion. It was a double meaning because the starting town was called Seclusion, and the players recruited each other through messages they posted on a job board in town, these signals they shared with each other. But also, we were running the games remotely through Google Meet because we were all locked down in our homes. So, Signals from Seclusion seemed appropriate. And then, before people joined, I set up a few introductory posts with the resources they might need. I had a guide to my campaign setting, I had a list of deities and domains. I tried to keep my campaign guide simple, but it was still a little extra. I definitely think that whenever I run another campaign in whatever world I'm developing right now, I would not put as much detail into it as I did for that game. But that being said, that specific campaign world had a lot of baggage and a lot of details and a lot of things people, I felt, did need to know when making characters. Just based on the fact that I'm making a new world where none of that exists, I probably wouldn't be in the same situation when setting up another campaign. I had a post about what content people could use when making their characters, which was pretty much anything. I've made videos about this before, but I don't tend to ban things in my games. And also, we had dozens of players, and I was not remotely interested in policing their character sheets. I just did not have the bandwidth for that. And then I wrote up this introductory post. How is this going to work? Read this first, West Marches style campaign description. So lots of people want to play one-shots, but I don't think I want to run the same game over and over, and I don't want to divide folks up for different campaigns. This should tell you a lot about me, actually, by the way. There's nothing wrong with running the same game more than once. I just don't like doing it because I like every D&D game I run to have meaning, and I feel like if I set it in a world and characters have experienced something, I don't want to have someone else in the same world experience the exact same thing. I'm getting over that. I do probably want to run some one-shots in person at some point in the next year or so. That's just some interesting insight going back to this post. And I don't want to divide folks up for different campaigns, so we are going to do this West Marches style, and I'm leaving it to you all to select your groups. Instead, I'm dropping all of you into the same region as level 1 characters. There will be a bunch of different adventures listed in the subreddit, and you can sign up for each one. Each adventure can take 4 players, at least at lower levels. Once 4 folks sign up, that adventure is considered taken. The group will schedule the game. I will generally run on weekdays between 8:30 to 6, and then we will play. However, this will not be the end of the story. On each adventure, the heroes will learn about new plot hooks, rumors, odd jobs, wayward monsters, and hidden treasures in the area. When they do, they will start new feeds to see who is interested in going on that mission. Once the first round of adventures wraps up, the players will decide where they want to go next, who they want to bring, and when they want to play. I ask that we keep rotating so we don't accidentally form cliques. Once you've played 2 games with someone, please refrain from signing up for a 3rd game with them until you've played another game with different players. That's from the Matt Colville video. I wouldn't do that again. More on that in a bit. I'm going to use the milestone method, so everyone will level up when they return to the home base town at the end of each mission. If you want to team up with folks of different levels, that's fine. If you want to team up with folks who are all wizards or all clerics and you don't have a balanced party, that's fine. I will give inspiration to players who do the following: post recaps of their adventures, list new adventures, update a map of the setting with new information. I will not be providing a map, it's up to you to build one together. Posting new job board posts and taking point on gathering folks for new quests/missions. I will also give inspiration throughout the games, and I am fine with you having more than 1 point of inspiration at a time. This video from Matt Colville sums up what I'm going for. See you all in the Hidden Hollow. Then I added some comments after our first session or two, an update that came up during our last game. You don't need to successfully complete the adventure to level up. You just need to reach that location and return alive. A lot could change once you get there, so win, lose, or draw, you'll level up once you get back to Seclusion. If I were to run a campaign like this again, I would give some serious thought to not using milestone leveling, but actually moving to an experience point leveling system. I'm not certain that I would, but I've been toying with the idea of going back to using experience points, at least for certain games, and I do think that would fit with the old school approach to this campaign that I had in mind. I definitely think it would be a mistake to say, you level up regardless of what happens, win, lose, or draw. Like, if they're going out there for an objective, for a mission, you should be getting the experience points for completing the mission. But I think I would have a different experience point system, maybe points for discovering things, and you just don't get the points for, not completing the mission. Like, I would give partial experience for going out there, even if you did not defeat the monsters. I honestly might not even tie experience points to monsters, because I think that would incentivize going out and being reckless as opposed to exploration. Also, any new players will join at level 1. I do not promise that adventures in this sandbox will be balanced by level, so proceed with caution. I knew even this early on that folks would be inviting their friends to join the game, which did happen once or twice, even though this was a very short-lived campaign. And I liked the idea that anyone who arrived would be low level. That made sense to me. I also had a post about what folks could do with their downtime, and how we would probably resolve the things they wanted to do through private messages in between sessions. This was inspired in part by another Matt Colville video about the missed opportunities of not having true downtime in your campaigns. They could do research, ask questions of NPCs, buy things, etc. I slightly referenced the downtime rules in Xanathar's Guide to Everything because that's a great starting point, but a lot of these ended up being fun, text-based, role-playing conversations with NPCs. The last introductory post had a thread where players could introduce their player characters. Then I would create Reddit flair for the character and assign it to the player. So anybody who saw the player's name in a Reddit comment when they were signing up for jobs or whatever would see the character's name, race, class, and I believe the character's pronouns were in there as well. That aspect worked really well, and honestly, if I was running the game through Facebook or email, that part would be a lot more challenging to manage. I don't know how I would reconcile that. I created my map of the Hidden Hollow using, of all things, Google Sheets. Here it is, divided up into the various territories. This was not intended to be exact, like there's no way the river ran that straight, but it was just my representation of the area for my own reference. And in hindsight, I wish I had formatted this a little bit more like a hex crawl map. The idea is clearly there. I've broken things down into regions and pinpointed where certain locations are, but I was so focused on making sure that each adventure could be run in the allotted time of a session that I made everything really, really close to the starting town, because I wanted to cut down on the travel time we dealt with during the game. So instead of the day or half day that each hex represents in a hex crawl map, each of these squares represents 1 hour of travel. But that also didn't exactly work because there are some areas where it's meant to be longer because of the terrain, so it was just kind of difficult to manage in this format. That's definitely something I would do differently if I was going to run a campaign like this again. Pretty much all of the names, all the proper nouns in this adventure came from either my existing notes on the world or from the Twitter account D&D Rumors. I would literally just scroll through that Twitter feed and find things that I thought were interesting and drop them into a Google Doc. Then I would sort them based on what might work based on different levels, which ones sounded like they could be more high-level adventures versus low-level adventures, and then I would seed them around the map and find ways to set them up when writing other adventures. This map was definitely designed in a way where everything gets more dangerous the further into the Hidden Hollow you get. It wasn't one for one, and I liked peppering in these higher-level locations into the surrounding environments. But the idea is that the group would start slowly dealing with the lower level threats in the immediate area. And as they dealt with the more dangerous threats, we could start to hand wave away some of the travel time because they would be out-leveling it or removing it from the board, so that the amount of time it took to get to the higher level stuff would be a lot faster. I worried a lot about travel time when I was running this campaign, and I think for good reason, because I did not have a solution for it. Sometimes I would get new ideas for adventures or locations or rumors or quests in the middle of a session or in between sessions, so I would just add it to the map. For example, during downtime, one of the wizards asked me if he could get some of the magical tattoos that are in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. But I hadn't set those up in any way, and I didn't feel that I could justify having an NPC in town who could make them. Honestly, I could have, but I just didn't want to. I thought it would be a lot more interesting if it was something that was harder to obtain. So I gave one of these tattoos to the Dwarven Guardian who protects the Town of Seclusion, and I said that he got his tattoos in the Hidden Hollow by winning a one-on-one wrestling match with a Yuan-Ti. So I made a note to add some Yuan-Ti to the map, and then the player would have to figure out where they were and how to get there, and how to win a wrestling match if he wanted to get one of those tattoos. Speaking of that protector, let's talk about the starting town. One piece of advice from Ben's blogs is that the town should be safe. The reason for that is because if the players know that there's potentially adventure in town, they will always go for that instead, because it's closer, it's safer, and then they won't go exploring. That's why I made sure to establish that the only powerful NPC in the area was tasked with protecting the town. He would never leave town to go on some other mission, regardless of what the mission was. Seclusion was also separated from the Hidden Hollow by a river, so that made it less likely that random monsters would ever follow the players out of the jungle, out of the wilderness, into town. I also do want to touch on the important NPCs in Seclusion. There were some temple leaders and some bartenders. I had 2 rival taverns, which I don't think I would do again in a West Marches game. I think that would be great in any other campaign, because it keeps the hometown dynamic. Every time they return to that town, there would be changes, there would be tension, there would be some faction play, there would be things to interact with, because it would create conflict that the players would eventually have to deal with. But that works towards the opposite purpose of something like a West Marches game, where the goal is to leave the town and spend as much time as possible out in the wilderness. But the 2 NPCs everyone spent the most time dealing with was Demir, who was an eccentric drow wizard who lived on a boat on the river and sold potions and scrolls. Think a drow version of Doc Brown from Back to the Future, except... No, that was his whole deal. And the other NPC was Skulldug, who ran the curio shop Skullduggery. He was an Egyptian hairless-style tabaxi who ran, essentially, the pawn shop. He'd sell any equipment from the player's handbook, and he would buy anything that any party member was willing to sell. Even if he wasn't the one who posted a job board posting about it, he would buy anything. He also dressed like Russell Brand's character in Forgetting Sarah Marshall. And his shop was built into the skull of a dragon turtle, and in fact, the whole town was essentially built into the bones of a dragon turtle. The inn was called the Turtle Shell Inn, and it was literally a dragon turtle's shell. There were elements of spine or appendage bones integrated into other architecture. I always like that idea. I always like that there's a town built into the bones of some ancient, awesome, gargantuan, dead creature. I just like it. Then I posted 5 job board postings that the players could sign up for when they first joined the campaign. These were all original adventures because I'm insane and I wanted to make extra work for myself, apparently. And every job board posting was inspired by or adapted from one of the tweets on that D&D Rumors account. I picked 5 and turned them into starting adventures. And then I picked a few more that I could reference as part of those adventures. For example, one of the missions might read like this in my notes. The title would read, The Job Board. Retrieve a white apple from the twisted tree in the Cemetery of the Damned. Then for my notes, I would say where it was, down the Unity Road. Skulldug posted the job. Reward, 40 gold per apple. And then I would share the original D&D Rumors tweet just so I could basically see how the idea had originated. A twisted tree stands within an old cemetery, growing fruit that can heal any disease. A company of undead warriors stands watch over it. I actually don't know if that was all one tweet or if I combined a couple that were thematically related. I did that a lot. I made them white apples as a reference to the Sunless Citadel adventure from Tales from the Yawning Portal. And then in my notes, I had a section of future rumors that I could tie into this adventure. The goblins of the Black Shrine of Ages are as strong as giants. Agents of Raxus have reopened the Black Shrine of Devastation. Raxus was a character from my own campaign setting, so I changed a couple of the proper nouns for some of these tweets. And that was true across the board. But these rumors were specifically linked to this adventure because I felt that I could tie them into it really well. I found 2 rumors that had Black Shrine in them, and I knew that I could link them, and I decided that those could be mausoleums inside of a cursed cemetery, so I tied them to that adventure. So in order to set up these rumors, I added details during the adventure that the players could witness and basically report back on. The Black Shrine of Devastation was a building that had its doors hanging open, and when the players went inside, they would see 4 pillars that used to contain something, very clearly had something of some power on it, but are now gone. And there were some clues as well to give a sense of the nature of some of these artifacts. Meanwhile, they saw a goblin passing through the cemetery, completely ignoring the undead, totally unfazed by them. This goblin walked over to these big, heavy stone doors, opened them effortlessly, and entered another mausoleum. Their mission was just to go get some white apples and not get killed by the undead, but they could come back into town and report on what they saw. And if any players were interested in learning more about that, they could put a team together and go back into the cemetery to investigate. I also posted a bounty board, a reference to another Matt Colville video, to further encourage people to go out and sign up for adventures. These were my first 5 job board postings. Rescue the missing merchant Duncan Dane from the Forest of Ash. Retrieve a white apple from the twisted tree in the Cemetery of the Damned. Hunt the tribe of Stormhill goblins who killed Jesse Durand. Root out Baldru the Herald, lurking in the White Rock Hills with a gang of thieves. Steal a spellbook from the Tower of Argus the Vain in the Caustic Swamp. I don't believe anybody actually signed up for that final mission. There were definitely some people who considered it, but they just never got around to actually trying to put anything together. But folks did go on other missions, and they wrote recaps, and they put out job board postings requesting people to join them and go on other missions based on things that they had experienced or heard about in those introductory missions. The folks who found the missing merchant also found the body of a guard from Nyx who had been killed, and wanted to return that body back to its hometown. And they also heard rumors of another town, Kiln, that was cursed. Both of these towns were further in the Hollow, and led to further adventures. Going to Nyx gave them the location of a hidden library, guarded by a chain devil. Kiln was run by a gang of adventurers turned villains, under the control of an aboleth. The mission to kill the goblins led to an almost TPK, I've talked about that before, but then they discovered a haunted monastery. So some folks organized a mission to go into that monastery, and during that mission, they found a deed for the monastery, so now one of the players effectively owned it. They planned to arrange another mission to go back in and clean out the rest of the undead, but we never got around to actually scheduling that before the campaign ended. Some players also started working together to make a directory of the information they had about the environment and about the world at large. And they worked together to keep the map up to date. This is the map that the players saw because they made it together. The players keeping these things up to date would read every recap on the subreddit and put the relevant information into the atlas or into the map. There were a few other missions that we never got around to completing because we only ran about 7 or 8 sessions before the campaign ended. So let's talk about why this campaign did not last very long. I really enjoyed running this game, but it was also really challenging. Each group, each player wanted to play a lot and often. So instead of being able to space them out, I kind of ended up running 4 games in 2 weeks. That was a lot of scheduling and coordinating and a lot of DM prep. And the prep did not get any easier. DMing often feels like you're laying the track right in front of the train, but that was especially true of this campaign, because I did not know what missions people would be interested in going on until they said so. So I didn't want to do very much prep in advance because I didn't want it to then go to waste if nobody ever went to that region. Were I to do this again, I would almost certainly take some existing dungeons from books or online adventures or something, and then seed them throughout the area. Then again, that's really hard for me to do. Partially that's because I just don't personally read adventures that often. I don't usually enjoy reading adventures. It's very difficult for me to get into the headspace needed to do it. But also, so often, I feel like it's much easier just to invent something whole cloth rather than read an adventure. It's faster for me personally, and I have a much better sense of ownership because I know every part of the adventure that has been written. I know all the details anyone can know about it. But for this much content, I think a new approach would be essential for anyone running a campaign like that, or at least if I was to run a campaign like that again. The other issue, and I predicted that this might happen, it was in the Matt Colville video and everything, it was definitely a possibility, was that distinct groups wound up forming. The same people would want to play together, not because they knew each other from before the game or got along particularly well, it was just because they were all interested in following the same plot beats from session to session. And honestly, if I could have solved the problem of everybody wanting to play D&D all the time and I'm basically being asked to run a game every couple of days, then this would not have been a big deal. I had a rule that you couldn't go on the same adventure with the same people twice in a row because it would lead to these cliques forming. And we had lots of people that wanted to play, and I wanted to make sure that groups were given a chance to rotate out and players were given a chance to play. But really, regardless of groups forming or cliques or whatever, the people who wanted to play were playing. Preventing groups from forming did not end up mattering in practice as much as I expected it to. I was still running tons of games. And honestly, it might have been kind of interesting just to let it happen, just to let 2 or 3 campaigns exist in a shared space. I was definitely glad that some players had a chance to bounce around, be in part of different groups, interact with different players, but I don't think I needed to make a rule about it, and I don't think I needed to make everybody stick to it. As with so many other D&D campaigns, those early sessions had a lot of people who wouldn't be a part of a lot of later games because folks drop out or just aren't as active because real life stuff comes up and they don't have the time to play anymore, or they weren't really feeling the vibe of the campaign, so they're less invested, which happens all the time in any D&D campaign. But when it happened this time, we still had about 8 to 10 dedicated players. Allowing those players to divide into 2 groups would have been fine. Another rule that I eventually gave up on was that only 4 people could go on a mission. I ended up allowing 5 on one mission because we had an odd number of people signing up for the early adventures. And we had some people who were starting to put together a super group to go deal with the Aboleth. If that had happened, that probably would have been a party of at least 7 or 8. Now, I think 4 people was still a good rule because of the time constraints we were working with for each session. But whether or not I would keep that rule if I was running a similar game would depend a lot on the group. And honestly, it would depend a lot if we were playing in person or remotely. Because the more people you play with in an online game, especially if they are not part of a regular game and they're playing with people they haven't played with before, see the previous rule, the more challenging crosstalk becomes. Ultimately, the final reason that campaign ended is because I finally got a job. I had been fully unemployed when the campaign began, and I was very clear with everyone, the moment I get a new job, this campaign ends. But I still think a lot about how I could capture some of the energy of that campaign, but without dealing with those same challenges. I don't have a solution yet. This isn't me saying, this is how I'm going to implement what I learned into my games. I just want to share that experience with you. And I definitely want to know if this game has inspired you, if you've learned something from this video, let me know. And if you want to end up running a game like this, definitely let me know. Hit me up in the comments below. Also, if I were to run this again, I would definitely use some online resources to take some of the work and the weight off of my shoulders. Which brings me to this video's sponsor, Describe. They have more than 7,000 scenes describing locations, monsters, NPCs, magic items, and dialogue that you can read aloud at your table. Honestly, if I was doing prep for another West Marches game, or any game where rumors and plot hooks matter, I could totally just search rumor and pull a bunch of options from Describe. I would have a bunch of dynamic and descriptive plot hooks that I could just drop into my games, like plea for help for a kidnapped mentor, or overheard speech by a rebel, or maybe my favorite result under that search, ghost ship with female captain. Whispers pass easily from lips to ear to lips of the ghastly vessel Drowned Maiden, whose spectral captain commands a cursed crew from upon a rotting deck. They say a mist, impenetrable to the eye, is the ship's harbinger, that the fog seals your doom. From that mist charges the Wraith Captain's skeletal crew, bloated flesh still hanging from their slouched forms. sabers as sharp as the day they died. Then she appears, the drowned maiden, dark against a moonless sky, its hull rotted and decayed, its sails tattered, its rigging twisting, writhing in the wind like wretched worms. And at its wheel, alight with death's pale glow, the Wraith Captain descends upon you, served by the very crew who threw her overboard so many years past. Never mind, I don't have any questions about what my next D&D campaign is going to be anymore. It's this. This is the campaign. Whatever I need to do to make this happen, that's the campaign. You can visit dscribe.com/supergeek and use the code SUPERGEEK to save 10% off of your first subscription payment. That's dscryb.com/supergeek. Thank you so much to Dscribe for sponsoring this video. And thank you so much for watching. Again, this I don't really think is an advice video, but it is at least, we'll call it an inspiration video. How's that? Or at least a campaign. It's kind of a campaign diary. Kind of. I don't know, but I think it is useful. If you want to support the channel, there are 4 ways you can do that. You can subscribe or hit the bell, and that lets you know as soon as new videos come out. You can join my Patreon. If you join at $3 a month, you get cool D&D content that I put out just for my patrons, and you can participate in patron-exclusive live streams. At $5 a month, you get these videos a few days early. And at $10 a month, your name shows up in the credits of that D&D content I put out for my patrons. The 3rd way you can support the channel is by joining the Discord. We have a really cool community of really nice people. They're helping each other create characters and campaigns, and just talking about actual play shows and recommending things to each other. It's really lovely. The 4th and final way you can support the channel is by signing up for my newsletter. The links for all those are in the doobly-doo below. Until next time, play fair and have fun.